Prepare to be captivated by the enigmatic and the eerie in this gripping exploration of the paranormal. Welcome to ADuosEncounter, where the supernatural meets the unexplained. Back in my late teens, my cousin and I found ourselves in an unusual and eerie situation while staying at my house. Our parents were out of town, leaving us to our own devices. It's essential to note that we were both completely sober during this experience. I was in the living room watching television, while my cousin was in my parents' bedroom, engrossed in his own TV show. The connection between our two separate spaces was a narrow hallway that also led to the bathroom and two other bedrooms. Suddenly, without any warning, I found myself snapping to attention as a peculiar phenomenon unfolded before me. A ball of light, approximately 2 to 3 feet wide, materialized and floated gracefully from one bedroom, making its way into the hallway and finally settling into the other bedroom. What struck me as especially odd was the contrast within this ball of light. It was dark black at its core, surrounded by a radiant, glowing exterior. Intrigued yet perplexed by what I had just witnessed, I was about to ponder this strange occurrence when my cousin abruptly dashed into the hallway. I couldn't see him from where I stood, but I could sense his presence. His face was etched with fear and disbelief, mirroring my own bewildered expression. Before I could utter a word, he asked me the very question that had formed in my mind. Did I see what he just had? I was eager to hear his account of what had transpired in my parents' bedroom while I was in the living room. To my astonishment, he narrated a story that differed significantly from mine. According to him, he had watched an old man, presumably a spirit, slowly traversing from one bedroom into the hallway and eventually into the other bedroom. What he emphasized was the absence of legs on this apparition. He saw only the upper torso of an old man. Strangely, despite being in different rooms with no direct line of sight to each other, both of us had observed something moving along the same path through the house, from one bedroom, through the hallway, and into the other bedroom. What baffled us even more was that we had seen these distinct entities simultaneously. In the aftermath of this inexplicable encounter, we decided to investigate the second bedroom, the final destination of the spectral journey. Yet, upon turning on the lights and scrutinizing every corner, we found absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. It was as though whatever we had both seen had vanished without a trace. This baffling event wasn't the first brush with the supernatural in my life. During my younger years, I had encountered several inexplicable occurrences, such as doorbells ringing at odd times and mysterious knocking sounds. These occurrences could typically be attributed to malfunctions or the house settling, but there was one incident that stood out. One night, when I was about 14, I heard a knock coming from my bedroom wall that was shared with a back room. This knocking, though rare, always happened late at night and consisted of just a single knock. I had always brushed it off as the house creaking, but on this particular night, I decided to engage with whatever was responsible. I knocked back on the wall, and to my surprise, I received a response, a knock in return. Curiosity piqued. I knocked twice more, and each time, the unseen entity replied with precisely 2 knocks. It was an eerie and unexplainable interaction. Determined to uncover the source of these knocks, I illuminated the back room by turning on all the lights and called out, inviting whatever was responsible to reveal itself. However, my search yielded no results, and the entity remained elusive. Now, 15 years later, I still find myself haunted by these enigmatic experiences from my teenage years. The question remains, what did my cousin and I encounter that fateful night? 2 distinct apparitions, a ball of light and a legless old man, had left an indelible mark on our memories, sparking a fascination with the supernatural that continues to linger. My family has always been closely knit, where one person's house essentially becomes everyone's place. Over the years, We've moved around town quite a bit, adapting to whatever fit our budget and space requirements. However, there was one house that stood out among the rest, an eerie abode on Maple Street, located in an unusually odd area of our already sketchy town. Maple Street had a reputation for being a hub of unusual occurrences and oddities. In a town riddled with crime, unexplained deaths, rampant drug problems, and a significant population of mentally ill individuals, this house, in particular, earned a notorious reputation among locals. It was famously referred to as that house, even though it no longer stands today, having been torn down by city order due to irreparable damage. Within the walls of that enigmatic house, strange phenomena were known to occur. The most unsettling of these incidents took place on the staircase, which was visible from a chair where my grandmother would often sit at night. Past midnight, she would hear the eerie creaking of footsteps, a faint pounding as if someone was descending the stairs, and shadows that seemed to suggest a presence pacing up and down the stairs. The unnerving part was that there was no one on the staircase. These noises would often jolt awake my older cousins, setting a disconcerting tone for the nights spent there. As if to add to the bizarre ambience, my cousins and I would occasionally hear men's voices emanating from the opposite room, even though there was no one else in the house besides my grandmother. These occurrences weren't limited to the nighttime. Sometimes, even during the day, adults, usually the eldest cousins, would go downstairs to prepare a meal or take the dogs out, only to inexplicably start calling out our names, instructing us to go to bed when we were attempting to wind down for the night. But the strangeness didn't stop there. There was an unusual incident involving the kitchen, specifically a door leading to a closet where my aunt used to hang her trash bags for the dogs. Above the hook where the bags were hung, a shelf held white ceramic sugar and spice pots. My second youngest cousin had an intense fear of characters like Michael Myers and the Scream villain. For him, even seeing the trash bags and pots out of the corner of his eye triggered fear, as they vaguely resembled those figures. We tried rearranging the ceramics in the bags, yet it always seemed to take the shape of a menacing figure, casting a surreal atmosphere in the kitchen. One evening, as we were making a giant pan of ramen noodles on high heat and watching a scary movie on TV, an uncanny coincidence occurred. A pot holder on the stove caught fire just as something ablaze transpired on the screen. The timing was too eerie to ignore, making us question whether it was mere coincidence or something more sinister. In a separate incident, our youngest cousin was inadvertently left alone in the living room while the rest of us were busy. Chaos suddenly erupted when he began screaming in fear. Glass shattered loudly, my brother and two cousins were embroiled in an argument, and books fell inexplicably in another room. Although it could have been an accident, my sister's response suggested otherwise, as she exclaimed, "What are you doing?" instead of reacting to a simple accident. Amidst this chaos, one of the older cousins rushed to the youngest, who had been left unattended. He had narrowly escaped injury when a pan fell and splashed hot water, narrowly missing him. Afterward, the tumultuous environment suddenly settled, leaving us baffled by the inexplicable chain of events. On yet another occasion, we returned home to discover the back door open. It could have been a result of the door's tendency to become unlatched on breezy days, or even a neighborhood child slipping in and out through the back alley. The exact cause remained a mystery. In this strange house, an unusual phenomenon also affected one of my cousins, who had been born partially blind due to water on the brain and eye complications. Starting around the age of 4, she would sit in her room and speak to people who weren't there, often addressing them by name and even referencing details about deceased relatives. Her bedroom, located at the beginning of a long, 3-section hallway, became a center of inexplicable occurrences. Odd shadows, peculiar light blurs, and strange shapes resembling our dog would appear without apparent cause. This unexplained activity extended to closets and doors in the house. The closet doors, located at the end of the hallway, would frequently jam, despite having no locks or obstructions. The struggle to open them became a recurring occurrence. Additionally, the closet in the corner of the kitchen, where trash bags were hung, perpetually seemed to take on the shape of a figure, triggering fear in the younger cousin who was terrified of characters like Michael Myers and Scream. In Sussex County, Delaware, nestled near the Brock Hill River and Slaughter Beach, lies a winding road known as 13 Curves. The name alone suggests a mysterious and intriguing journey. It's said that this road, with its nearly 90-degree turns, skirts around ancient Indian burial grounds and carries with it an eerie reputation. Locals tend to avoid it after nightfall, and for good reason. Your own encounter with 13 Curves Road unfolded on the 13th of September in 2017, adding an extra layer of eeriness to the tale. Your daughter and her friend, seeking a thrill, proposed a journey down this enigmatic road. You, intrigued by the prospect and perhaps dismissing the rumors, agreed. After all, 13 Curves on the 13th sounded like an adventure. As you embarked on your expedition around 7:30 to 8 p.m., the temperature took an immediate and unexpected plunge, chilling the air around you. The sensation of cold clung to you, setting a foreboding tone for the journey ahead. Navigating the winding road, you couldn't help but notice how strangely secluded and desolate it felt, especially after passing the first curve. It struck you as odd that a car had suddenly appeared in your rearview mirror. There hadn't been any driveways or side streets for miles. What was more disconcerting was the speed at which the vehicle was hurtling toward you. In a matter of seconds, it had closed a considerable distance. Panicking, you exchanged bewildered glances with your daughter, both unsure of how to react. You watched the road, then your mirror, and back to the road, as if caught in a surreal loop. The car behind you showed no signs of slowing down. Instead, it was accelerating as if in a reckless pursuit. Fear surged through you as you prepared for an imminent collision. You spoke aloud, "This person is going to crash." But as you looked back at the road, then in your mirror once more, you were met with an inexplicable sight. The vehicle had vanished, as if it had never existed. There were no signs of a crash, no screeching tires or wreckage. It had simply vanished into thin air. Confusion and terror seized your heart. You searched the darkness for any trace of the vehicle, scanning the surroundings for clues. But there was nothing, just the pitch-black night and an eerie silence that hung heavily around you. Summoning all your courage, you decided it was time to leave, to escape this inexplicable and unsettling place. However, as you made your way out, you encountered another baffling phenomenon. 3 mysterious mists swirled around your vehicle, each moving in a different direction. It was as though the very air itself was conspiring to confound and frighten you. It took an agonizing 15 minutes to finally break free from this eerie loop, and as you did, you couldn't help but wonder what malevolent forces were at play. The entire ordeal had been inexplicable, defying all logical explanation. Desperate to find your way home, you reached for your daughter's GPS, hoping it would provide some semblance of normalcy. Yet, even the GPS seemed under the sway of these paranormal forces. It consistently directed you back to 13 Curves, entrapping you in a never-ending loop. With determination and a sense of survival, you forged a path forward, ignoring the GPS's misguided instructions. Slowly but surely, you managed to escape the grip of this eerie road, returning to the comforting glow of highway lights. As you left 13 Curves Road behind, the temperature returned to a more pleasant range. The heater was switched off, windows rolled down, and the highway seemed to stretch ahead, free from the supernatural shackles that had bound you earlier. Yet, the strangeness continued. Your daughter's friend spoke of people she had seen while you navigated the enigmatic road, people who stood on rocks, observing your passage with an unsettling intensity. Their presence, unseen by you, only added to the lingering unease of your journey. Your adventure on 13 Curves Road was a chilling reminder that some places defy explanation, harboring mysteries and malevolent forces that remain beyond the comprehension of mere mortals. It was an experience that would haunt your memories and forever deter you from venturing down that unnerving road. In the year 2002, your family made the journey to the charming town of Swannanoa, tucked away in the Appalachian mountains of western North Carolina. There, you rented a 3-bedroom split-level house that was flanked by a sprawling backyard and an age-old barn. The house sat atop a sloping hill that you affectionately referred to as a mountain, and this new home would serve as your sanctuary for nearly 2 years. From the moment you moved in, an eerie feeling seemed to hang in the air, as if the very walls of the house held secrets and memories that refused to fade. It was a sensation that transcended mere explanation, an uncanny awareness that you were never truly alone within those walls. The presence of something beyond the ordinary loomed, a feeling akin to someone silently entering a room and making their presence known without a word. The first paranormal event etched into your memory was a dramatic one, involving a pitcher of tea that would send shivers down your spine whenever you recalled it. It unfolded in the heart of your home, the kitchen, where your mother was diligently cooking. A large island occupied the center of the room, and atop it sat a freshly brewed pitcher of tea. In an inexplicable turn of events, the pitcher seemed to defy gravity, gliding off the island's edge and crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the kitchen, leaving both you and your mother in shock. Amid the shards of broken glass, your stepfather, a self-proclaimed skeptic, chuckled at the notion of a paranormal presence. He proposed a logical explanation, suggesting that the pitcher had merely been knocked off the counter. His skepticism was understandable, but it did little to dispel the eerie aura that had settled within the house. As days turned into weeks, inexplicable occurrences became a part of daily life. It wasn't long before you and your friend bore witness to blinds that moved as though guided by an unseen hand. You watched in fascination as each individual slat seemed to be caressed, one by one, from top to bottom, by an invisible force. The very next night, your friend experienced the same phenomenon, casting aside his initial skepticism. Doors, which your parents were meticulous about locking, occasionally revealed an unsettling tendency to open on their own. Despite the diligent efforts to secure them, you would sometimes find doors cracked or fully ajar. The kitchen door, leading to the porch, was particularly notorious for this, often appearing open despite being locked and barricaded. One particular night, as you returned home from work, a sight in the backyard caught your attention. The ancient barn, perched high upon the sloping landscape, seemed to emanate an eerie glow from a second-story window. The source of light danced, pacing back and forth as if in silent contemplation. It was a vision that defied explanation and piqued your curiosity. Determined to investigate further, your stepfather cleared a path through the overgrown grass to reach the barn. Upon closer inspection, the barn's condition revealed its inaccessibility. The second floor had deteriorated to the point of near collapse. Your stepfather dismissed the notion of anyone being up there, attributing the strange light to tricks of the night. Yet, the barn continued to be a focal point for inexplicable occurrences. You, your brother, your girlfriend, and friends all witnessed the mysterious light, which seemed to manifest itself on numerous occasions. It was a light that defied logical explanation, manifesting and then disappearing at will. As the year rolled on and you continued to live in this enigmatic house, its paranormal activity escalated. The sensation of an invisible presence grew stronger, and you developed an uncanny ability to predict impending deaths. One day, as you played your drum kit in the basement, a whispered voice pierced the silence. Your name echoed through your right ear, causing you to drop your drumsticks in shock. There was no logical explanation for the voice, and the family dogs, standing nearby, whimpered and stared at the same spot on the wall where the voice seemed to emanate. Frightened and perplexed, you began to develop nightly rituals to ward off the fear. Your childhood home had become a place of unease, where shadows seemed to dance in the corners of your vision. You would lock your bedroom door, leave the bathroom light on, and set your TV on a sleep timer, fearing the silence of the night. It was during one of these nights that you heard a sudden thump and the roll of a ball, yet there was no rational explanation for these sounds. The house, it seemed, was alive with secrets and unexplained phenomena that would continue to haunt your memory long after you left its unsettling embrace. Nestled deep within the heart of Appalachia, at the head of a holler, lies a land steeped in history, tradition, and an inexplicable connection to the realm beyond. Generations of your family have called this place home, and over the years, it has borne witness to both life and death and abundance. Here, where the spirits of the departed are not distant memories but ever-present companions, the line between the living and the deceased blurs. In this enchanting corner of the world, the living have formed a unique bond with the dearly departed, a connection that transcends the ordinary. It's a legacy that has been passed down through 7 generations. The matriarchs of your family are known for their extraordinary abilities to see and commune with those who have crossed over. To outsiders, it might sound implausible or even bizarre, but within this close-knit community, it's as much a part of life as the rolling hills and babbling creeks. One of your earliest and most cherished memories is of your great-grandmother, a presence that remained with you long after her physical form departed this world. She would cradle you during those afternoon naps, comforting you with the wisdom of ages and the love that transcended the boundaries of mortality. In the gentle embrace of her spirit, you learned the colors she adored, her final thoughts as she departed this world, and the secrets she shared with your mother. Her essence, still vibrant, filled the rooms of your home and left an indelible mark on your heart. Yet, the story doesn't end there. Your home harbored more than one spirit, as evidenced by the encounter with the young girl in your bathroom. Her sudden appearance, innocent but unsettling, elicited a scream that pierced the tranquil Appalachian air. Your mother, never a stranger to the supernatural occurrences of the region, rushed to your side and saw the spectral child as well. The inexplicable presence vanished into thin air, leaving you with unanswered questions. Speculation arose that this ghostly child might have been the spirit of your great-great-aunt's sister, who met her untimely end on your very driveway. The veil between the worlds is thin in these parts, and those who have passed often find ways to linger, seeking solace or connection with the living. It seems that this connection to the spirit world extends beyond mere sightings. You possess an uncanny ability to sense impending departures, a phenomenon that has become a regular occurrence in your life. When your great-uncle passed away, you felt the shift in the energy around you. Even though you were miles away, indulging in a simple lunch, the knowledge of his passing settled upon you like a heavy shroud. It's as though the mountains themselves whispered secrets to you, the very land you call home being a conduit for these ethereal messages. Your quest for understanding, for a connection to others who have experienced the mystical nature of this region, has brought you to seek stories and insights from fellow Appalachians. You wonder if anyone else has felt the presence of spirits in these ancient hills, if there are others who have been privy to the intimate connection between the living and the deceased. You've traversed a considerable distance, relocating from Orlando, Florida, to return to this place of mysteries and magic, to the embrace of the Appalachian Mountains, where the spirits of the past continue to whisper their stories to those willing to listen. As you explore the depths of this mystical land, the enigma of the Appalachian Mountains endures. Every rustling leaf, every gentle breeze, and every whispering stream seems to carry the echoes of generations gone by. The spirits of your ancestors and countless others still linger, their stories woven into the very fabric of this ancient land. In this realm, the living and the deceased coexist, forging a connection that defies logic and explanation, a testament to the enduring mysteries of the Appalachian Mountains. When my daughter was about a year and a half old, we decided it was time to transition her from our room to her own nursery. Up until that point, she had never even taken a nap in there. The room was all set up and ready, but it had an eerie stillness about it that gave us an unsettling feeling. The first day of nap time in her nursery arrived, and I sat in a cushy chair, feeding her before putting her down. That's when I felt it, a disturbing sensation that someone was watching us. I tried to shake it off, attributing it to the unfamiliarity of the room and our changing routine. My daughter fell asleep while feeding, and I carefully placed her in the crib. As I left the room and went downstairs, I turned on the baby monitor. But just 10 minutes later, she woke up crying. I assumed it was because she was disoriented in her new surroundings and went back upstairs to comfort her. Despite my efforts, getting her back to sleep in her nursery was a struggle, and eventually, I brought her back to our room. That night, my husband attempted to put her down in her nursery, but the same scenario repeated itself. She would cry just 10 minutes after being put down. It seemed like she couldn't settle in her new room. I thought perhaps she preferred the comfort of our room's familiar surroundings. The next day, during nap time, I tried once more to put her down in her nursery. As I sat in the cushy chair, feeding her, that same uneasy feeling washed over me. It was as if the room itself was telling me to get out. I dismissed it as paranoia and proceeded to put her down for her nap. But just as before, she cried after only 10 minutes. At night time, my husband attempted to put her down in her nursery, but the result was the same, more crying and restlessness. Once again, we ended up bringing her back to our room, and she slept soundly. By the third day of trying to get her to sleep in her own room, I was determined. I sat in the nursery's cushy chair, feeding her, but that same dreadful feeling returned. As I carefully put her in the crib, I felt a sudden shove on my back. In sheer panic, I turned and ran out of the room, briefly leaving my child behind. Thankfully, my maternal instincts kicked in, and I rushed back to grab her, vowing not to return to that room. I explained the unsettling incidents to my husband, but he dismissed them, thinking I was just tired or anxious about the transition. However, that night, as he tried to put our daughter to sleep in her nursery, I listened through the baby monitor. I heard her sobbing uncontrollably, followed by what sounded like my husband's voice. In shock, I rushed to the nursery and flung open the door, only to find my husband sitting on the floor with our daughter, who was peacefully asleep. I was overwhelmed with confusion and started crying, accusing him of saying hurtful things to her. But my husband insisted he hadn't said a word. Our daughter had fallen asleep without any issues. At this point, my husband thought I was losing my mind. He had never heard me speak of these things before. Nevertheless, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong in that nursery. Desperate for answers, I called my sister, knowing that she had also experienced paranormal events in her childhood home. She suggested we smudge the nursery and gave me a special prayer to say. I waited until my husband got home, and together, we started the process. We began downstairs, with my husband smudging while I salted the house and recited the prayer. When we finally reached the nursery, we could feel the eerie atmosphere dissipating. As my husband smudged, I stood in the doorway, holding our daughter. Then, something astonishing happened. Our daughter's gaze followed an invisible presence as it moved out of the room, past me. She clapped her hands and said, "Bye-bye." It sent shivers down my spine. We completed the smudging, salting, and prayer ritual throughout the house. From that day forward, our daughter slept peacefully in her nursery without any disturbances. We never discovered what had been haunting that room, but we were relieved to have banished it. To this day, I can't explain what we experienced in that nursery, but I'm grateful we took the steps to rid our home of whatever malevolent presence had lurked there. This is both a personal account and a shared one, involving my uncle, aunt, cousins, and my mother. The story centers around a house in Terre Haute, Indiana, known as the Red House. This house became my first encounter with the paranormal, and it was an experience I would never forget. My uncle's family moved into this house in the early 1990s. It was a striking two-story shingle-style house with a corner lot and a distinctive red exterior. However, beneath its seemingly ordinary facade lay an unsettling secret, a creepy basement with unfinished dirt floors, rock and stone walls, a detached garage, and a mysterious secret room, which I'll get to later. Our first visit to my family's new home took place during Christmas in 1991. We had driven up from Florida to spend the holiday week with our relatives. Before our visit, my cousin, whom we'll call CJ, told me something that would prove to be unsettling. He, being the middle child with one older sister and one younger brother, mentioned that I would see ghosts when I came to visit. At the time, I laughed it off and dismissed his claims, as I didn't believe in ghosts at all. CJ went on to describe the numerous ghosts he had encountered in this house, mostly upstairs where his room was located. He claimed that only a few of these spirits dared to enter his room, while the others remained in the hallway and other parts of the house. Once again, I chuckled at his spooky tales, thinking that I would only believe it if I saw it with my own eyes. When we arrived at the Red House for Christmas week, I was struck by its sheer size. It was easily the largest house I had ever stayed in. My mind raced with thoughts of playing hide-and-seek or manhunt with my cousins inside this expansive mansion. I ended up staying in CJ's room, the same one where he had shared his ghostly encounters with me. My parents occupied the spare bedroom downstairs. As I climbed the stairs to my cousin's room, I marveled at the long hallway. Oddly, there were only 3 doors in that seemingly endless corridor. The first door on the left was the bathroom, the next on the right was my cousin Nicole's room, and at the very end of the hallway, CJ's room awaited. His room was surprisingly massive, resembling a mini ballroom. Stepping inside, I noticed his bunk bed against the far wall, adorned with a large window behind it. CJ had set up his TV and video game system to the right and an assortment of toys and Hot Wheel tracks to the left. There was also a small crawlspace door along the left side wall. On the first night at the Red House, CJ recounted all the experiences he had had in this room and throughout the house. While his stories did spook me a bit, I remained skeptical, firmly believing that ghosts weren't real. One thing I couldn't ignore, though, were the dark circles under CJ's eyes. He attributed them to his difficulty sleeping in that house, often staying awake most nights. That evening, I listened to his eerie tales, and eventually, we fell asleep. Nothing out of the ordinary occurred that night, and I believe the stories had merely been a figment of CJ's imagination. Little did I know that the very next day would change my perception forever. On my second day at the Red House, after returning inside from playing outside, CJ and I went upstairs to watch a movie and play with toys. We decided to set up a makeshift tent in the middle of the room and transformed it into a stadium for our action figures. We even installed some spy-tech toys around the room, including a motion sensor placed at the door. This sensor would beep if someone entered the room, serving as our defense against Nicole, who often barged in or messed with our setup. As we played with our action figures inside the tent, it suddenly started shaking lightly. I initially dismissed it, thinking it was Nicole trying to scare us. However, within a minute, the tent began shaking more violently. I glanced out the door, expecting to catch Nicole in the act, but she was nowhere in sight. When I returned to the tent, the shaking had stopped, and CJ remained frozen, gazing out of the unzipped window in the tent. Seconds later, the tent started shaking again, and this time, I jumped out, determined to catch CJ in the act. But the moment I stepped out and examined the room, the spy-tech toy sensor at the door went off. This confirmed that no one else was in the room except CJ and me. Nicole was lying on her bed in her room, watching television. Though this experience terrified me, I still wasn't entirely convinced that a ghost was responsible. I shared the strange incident with my parents during dinner, but they merely laughed it off, attributing it to our vivid imaginations. My uncle chimed in, jokingly asking if CJ's imagination had now affected me as well. CJ had indeed told his parents about the strange occurrences in the house, but they dismissed them as products of his imagination and paid little heed to the possibility of ghosts. That night, as I slept on the bottom bunk and CJ on the top, we experienced an ordeal that would forever haunt my memories. As I began dozing off, CJ reached around from the top bunk to get my attention. He told me to look down the hallway, a view easily accessible depending on which side of the bunk you slept on. From where I lay, all I had to do was turn my head to see right down the long upstairs hallway. I complied and saw a sight that still sends shivers down my spine, a slender, tall man in a toboggan and a long coat, his face covered in what appeared to be soot or a dusty powder. He was walking slowly toward our room, and as I continued to watch, I realized that I couldn't see anything below his knees. His legs seemed to stop right at the knees. Fear paralyzed me as I watched him approach. Thankfully, he disappeared just before reaching our room, but those few seconds felt like an eternity. I was so frightened that I couldn't move, and I simply turned my head to bury my face in my pillow. As I lay there, still shaking from fear, I suddenly felt an ice-cold sensation creeping along the side of my body facing the door. Slowly, I turned around to see a woman standing inches from me, holding a cat. She was so clear and vivid that it was impossible to mistake her presence. She wore tattered clothing and emitted a faint musky scent, as though she wore stale perfume. While I found it hard to believe, she bore a striking resemblance to the Fratelli mom from the Goonies, at least in terms of body type. My encounter with this spectral woman and her feline companion was a moment I could never forget. It was a chilling experience that left me shaken and terrified. From that point onward, I couldn't deny the reality of the paranormal. The Red House had introduced me to a world beyond our understanding, and I knew I had stepped into something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. When I was around 8 years old, I found myself sitting at my desk, diligently working on my math homework. My gaze shifted, and I peered through the window. To my delight, I spotted my friend swinging on the wooden swing in her garden. She wore her beloved red polo jacket, unmistakable in my memory. Eager to join in the fun, I hastened to complete my homework. My eyes periodically darted to the window, ensuring that my friend was still on the swing. As we often did, we communicated non-verbally through those brief glances, our shared understanding that a playdate was in order. Finally, with my homework completed in record time, I made my way outside, my excitement palpable. One last glance through the window confirmed that my friend was still on the swing, happily swinging away. Back when we were children, our parents had fashioned a primitive, do-it-yourself gate connecting our gardens. This ingenious shortcut spared us the inconvenience of traversing 3 streets to visit each other. I passed through the gate, entering my friend's garden, approaching her, or at least, the figure I believed to be her. However, as I drew closer, a puzzling realization washed over me: she wasn't there. Instead, I found myself in the presence of 3 other individuals. My sense of confusion deepened. Seated on the swing was a teenage boy wearing glasses. He bore a passing resemblance to my dad's friend's nephew, but it certainly wasn't him. There was a ladder nearby, typically used for grape picking, and atop this ladder stood a teenage girl. She plucked grapes and handed them to the boy on the ground, a peculiar flirtatiousness apparent in her actions. Though she resembled my cousin in some ways, it couldn't possibly have been her. My cousin lived a significant 100 kilometers away from me. The young boy accompanying them didn't resemble anyone I knew. Of all these individuals, only the boy on the swing seemed to notice my presence. His expression morphed into one of curiosity as he regarded me. He was somewhat surprised, but he didn't utter a word. Meanwhile, the teenage girl on the ladder and the boy she was flirting with paid me no heed, their interaction undisturbed. It was at this point that I realized my friend wasn't there, nor was anyone wearing the distinctive red jacket that had initially drawn my attention. My feelings were not rooted in fear, but rather a sense of unease and disorientation. I decided to leave without attempting to engage with these strangers. It felt as though something was amiss, and I lacked any connection to these individuals. My intuition told me to return to my friend's door and ring the doorbell, but my attempts went unanswered. With a growing sense of puzzlement, I retraced my steps to my friend's garden, only to discover that these enigmatic guests had vanished. The swing continued to sway, as though someone had just departed moments ago. I pondered their mysterious disappearance. They couldn't have simply run away into the surrounding gardens, and even my dog, known to be vigilant, had remained silent. My remarkably high fence made it impossible for them to leap over and escape. My greenhouse held no secrets either, leaving no place for them to hide. Feeling utterly perplexed, I eventually confided in my mother about the strange encounter. She observed that I appeared perfectly normal and exhibited no signs of distress during the incident. However, we both struggled to make sense of the situation. I tried contacting my friend, and when I finally reached her, she calmly confirmed that she was visiting her family in a different town during the time of the encounter. She insisted that she had no guests at her home, and nobody should have been there. Over the years, I've revisited this strange event in my mind countless times. My friend remained unfazed, having a belief in the paranormal, albeit her grounding in science. I grappled with the uncertainty of what I had witnessed. Was it a glitch in reality, a momentary tear in the fabric of the universe? Could it be that these guests had crossed over from a parallel dimension, their presence and mine momentarily intersecting? Or perhaps I had glimpsed something that was never meant to be seen, and my presence disrupted their otherworldly gathering. I continued to ponder the mysterious encounter in the parallel garden, forever left with more questions than answers. It was a summer evening, about 5.5 years ago, when an eerie incident unfolded in my life. My boyfriend was working a marketing job that required him to tour big city events all across the United States. Due to his hectic schedule, I only had the chance to see him twice a month, and he was usually accompanied by a partner. However, on this particular weekend, his partner had an art show in New York City and had flown up, leaving my boyfriend to undertake the 18-hour drive home alone. We had spoken earlier in the day around 6 a.m., and although he was attempting to make it home the same day, I knew it was unlikely, not to mention illegal, to complete such a long drive without adequate rest. Despite my concerns, I trusted him to make responsible decisions on the road. As the evening wore on, I was in bed, engrossed in my phone when I suddenly heard the front door open and close. This unexpected noise instantly piqued my curiosity. Glancing at the clock, it read 11:15 p.m., a time when I wasn't anticipating his arrival. My senses heightened as I lay still, listening intently to the sounds that followed. Footsteps echoed through the house, drawing closer to the kitchen. The distinctive clinking of kitchen cabinets opening and closing further confirmed someone's presence. I reached for my phone and attempted to call my boyfriend, seeking confirmation that it was indeed him. However, my call went unanswered. Uncertainty gnawed at me, amplified by the fact that I hadn't heard his phone ring either. Despite the growing unease, I continued to lie in bed, straining to listen. The footsteps began ascending the stairs, and as I recognized the unique cadence of his steps, my tension eased slightly. He was getting closer, inching up the stairs, and then, abruptly, the steps came to a halt. I could hear him just 3 steps from the top. A profound sense of anticipation hung in the air. However, the next moment, one step creaked, and then, silence. It was as though he had vanished into thin air. Baffled and increasingly anxious, I waited for some sign of his return or a phone call. Several minutes passed in eerie stillness. Unable to endure the uncertainty any longer, I decided to investigate downstairs. Cautiously, I descended the staircase, trying to make sense of the bewildering situation. To my surprise, I found all the doors securely locked, and nothing appeared to be disturbed or out of place. Confused and concerned, I returned to bed, my mind racing with questions, and tried calling my boyfriend again, this time with even more urgency. However, there was still no response. My imagination began to conjure disturbing scenarios, and I couldn't shake the fear that something terrible had happened to him. I desperately wished for his safety and prayed that he would return unharmed. Thankfully, the following day, my anxieties were laid to rest when my boyfriend arrived home, albeit about 14 hours after the perplexing events of the previous night. While he was physically unscathed, the inexplicable incident still lingered, leaving us both with unanswered questions about that strange night when footsteps ascended the stairs but never reached the top, and where reality seemed to blur into uncertainty. This story takes place 5 years ago, when I was 18 years old, and it still sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it. At 23 now, I've decided to share this chilling experience that unfolded when I was looking for a place to live and embarked on a journey that I could have never anticipated. My relationship with my parents had reached a tumultuous point, filled with constant clashes and strained emotions. At the time, I was a headstrong and arrogant teenager, and my father and I often found ourselves at odds. Despite our flaws, we loved each other deeply, and as time passed, we managed to work through our issues, ultimately strengthening our family bonds. However, for several years, our home was not a happy place. Once I turned 18, I was eager to break free and find my own space. While many of my friends were content living with their parents, they had great relationships with them. They had jobs and were attending college, saving money as they went along. My situation was different. I was determined to leave home as soon as possible. Every time I would pack my bags and leave, my parents would resort to drastic measures. They'd report me as a runaway, which landed me in jail overnight on several occasions. I never ended up in juvenile detention, but those nights in a holding cell served as harsh lessons that I couldn't ignore. Still, my stubbornness prevailed, and I was far from learning my lesson. It was clear that none of my friends were willing to become roommates with me, given my tumultuous history. So, I took a leap of faith and turned to Craigslist in search of an affordable place to rent. That's when I stumbled upon a listing for a decent, albeit small, house renting for an unbelievably low $550 per month. I knew there had to be a catch, but I was eager to find out the details. After reaching out to the listing, I received a response with an invitation to visit the house and discuss the rental in person. The lady who owned the place set up a meeting for that very night, so I made my way there, filled with curiosity and excitement. During our conversation, she explained the rental terms to me. Surprisingly, there were no papers to sign, just a request for a small deposit fee which I managed to scrape together. She told me I could move in the next day, as long as I paid the deposit. The following morning, I eagerly arrived at my new rental house, ready to start this new chapter of my life. As I unloaded my truck and settled in, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and independence. Little did I know that this would soon turn into a harrowing ordeal. Later that evening, around 8:30 p.m., I returned to the house from running errands and making a final trip to my parents' place to pick up a few more belongings. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed that the lady's car was still parked there. This caught me off guard, as I had not agreed to live with anyone else. Inside the house, I discovered her sitting on my couch, watching TV as if she had no intention of leaving. I couldn't hide my discomfort as I questioned her presence. "What the hell are you doing here, lady?" I asked, my irritation palpable. "You never mentioned anything about us being roommates." Nonchalantly, she replied, "Oh, I'll be staying here for a while, just until I can find my own place." I was taken aback, to say the least. Nowhere in our agreement had she mentioned that we would be sharing the house. I asked her how long she planned on staying, expecting her to say just a few days. However, her response was unsettling. "Only a few days," she said, but the lack of transparency about her intentions left me feeling uncomfortable and vulnerable. We didn't discuss any arrangements, but I was too tired and overwhelmed to argue, so I reluctantly accepted her presence and retreated to my room. I tried to fall asleep, still creeped out by the idea of a stranger staying in my new home. My unease was apparent, but I couldn't deny the exhaustion that weighed me down. I eventually drifted off to sleep, believing that locking my bedroom door would keep me safe. In the middle of the night, I was abruptly awakened by the faint sound of music coming from the living room. Irritated, I called out to her, asking her to lower the volume and let me sleep. She complied half-heartedly, and I attempted to fall back asleep. However, what I experienced next was the stuff of nightmares. There was a soft knock on my bedroom door, so light that it seemed almost hesitant. I demanded to know who was there and what they wanted, but I received no answer. The knocking grew louder and more insistent. The voice on the other side of the door began calling me Timmy, claiming that dinner was almost ready and that I shouldn't upset Mommy. Fear gripped my entire being as I realized that my name was not Timmy, nor was it even remotely close. As this realization set in, I felt a chilling sensation creep down my spine. The woman outside my door was deranged, and I knew I had to protect myself. Swiftly, I barricaded the door with a heavy dresser and grabbed my phone. Without hesitation, I opened the window and made a daring escape, fleeing to my truck and driving away as fast as I could. I couldn't bear to look back, and I never returned to that house. In the following weeks, I learned a terrifying truth about the woman who had invaded my life. Her son, named Timmy, had gone missing, and his lifeless body was eventually discovered buried in the backyard of that very house. Eileen, the woman who had been staying in my home, was accused of murdering her own son. Disturbingly, there was substantial evidence pointing to her poisoning him. It was a horrifying revelation that shook me to my core. I couldn't help but wonder if she had mistaken me for her son or if she was attempting to relive a twisted version of their past. To this day, I'm haunted by the memories of that night, unable to shake the feeling that if I had eaten the food she offered, I might have shared Timmy's tragic fate. It was the summer of 2018, and I had just graduated from high school. With dreams of independence and freedom, I'd spent 2 years diligently saving money from my job. My goal was to secure my own place, and it seemed within reach. I had my eyes on a downtown one-bedroom apartment conveniently located right next to my old high school. What could be better? Several friends were already living in the same building, making it the perfect choice for me. With $10,000 saved and no debts to worry about, I was thrilled to embark on this new chapter of my life. It was a moment filled with optimism and excitement. Finally, I could have my own space, my own four walls to call home, and the freedom to live life on my terms. However, just a week after moving into the apartment, things began to take a dramatic and unsettling turn. You see, two of my friends, Aaron and Rob, also lived in the same building, but on the third floor, just 2 apartments above mine. At first, they came by to hang out, which was completely fine. After all, it's natural for friends to visit. But then, things started to change. Their casual visits began to stretch into entire days and nights. The once pleasant company turned into an everyday presence in my apartment. I found myself becoming increasingly uncomfortable with their constant presence, especially since I'm naturally an introvert, and I had looked forward to enjoying my newfound solitude. Despite my hints and suggestions that they should spend less time in my place, they continued to treat my apartment as their hangout spot. It became clear that they were using my place as a makeshift crash pad, completely disregarding my comfort and wishes. My patience reached its limit when they stayed over for 2 days straight, refusing to leave. Finally, I mustered the courage to tell them they needed to find their own place. I'd given them a 2-week deadline. However, 2 weeks stretched into 4, and then 2 months, as they completely disregarded my boundaries. It was painfully apparent that these so-called friends were taking advantage of my kindness. They showed no respect for my space or my wishes. Every day, my apartment was filled with random strangers, loud music, smoking, and drinking until the early hours of the morning. The situation escalated to the point where the police were called to our building multiple times. I was incredibly lucky not to have been evicted. One night, as I struggled to sleep due to the relentless noise, I gathered the last of my patience. I had already asked them multiple times to keep it down, but they continued to ignore my pleas. Frustration and exhaustion overcame me, and I stormed out of my room to confront them. I demanded they leave immediately, including Aaron and Rob, who had overstayed their welcome. It took nearly 20 minutes of arguing and threats to call the police, but they eventually departed. Relieved that they were gone, I decided to deal with the mess in the morning and retired to my room to rest. However, my relief was short-lived. The next morning, I awoke abruptly at 6 a.m., disoriented and nursing a pounding headache. I stumbled out of my room in just my boxers, rubbing my eyes, hoping to make sense of it all. But what I encountered next sent shivers down my spine. There they were, Aaron and Rob, sitting on my couch as if they owned the place. I couldn't believe my eyes. "What the hell are you doing, bro? Get out of here!" I exclaimed in disbelief. "We're not going anywhere. Will you just chill?" Aaron responded dismissively. I had reached my limit. With my phone in hand, I immediately dialed 911, determined to resolve this situation once and for all. Thankfully, the police arrived quickly, but Aaron and Rob fled before they could be apprehended. I knew they had let themselves in using the spare key I had originally given them. My trust had been betrayed, and I was now living in constant fear of their return. Desperate to keep them out, I erected a barricade in front of the door, hoping it would deter them. My hope was that this ordeal would finally come to an end, but deep down, I feared it was far from over. As night fell, there was no sign of Aaron and Rob, and I began to relax. I had almost forgotten about the constant threat they posed. However, around 10:30 p.m., that false sense of security was shattered. Once more, I heard the jingle of my front door. My heart sank, and I couldn't believe it was happening again. The dread washed over me, and I realized that my tormentors were relentless. desperation in their voices, Aaron and Rob pleaded for entry, their apologies ringing hollow. "It's really cold outside. We're sorry, man. Please, just one last night. We won't mess up this time," they implored. But something about their apologies felt insincere. Deep down, I knew better than to trust them. I sat in silence, waiting for the police to arrive once more. My life had taken a dark turn, and my former friends were nothing more than a looming threat. In the end, my trust had been shattered, my boundaries violated, and my life forever changed by an experience that left a lasting bitterness in its wake. It was a regular day, and I had about 30 minutes before my shift was due to start. I decided to visit the large mall restroom near my store, not just to refresh my appearance, but also to answer nature's call. Little did I know that I was about to experience something profoundly unsettling in a place that bore witness to countless strange events. Our mall, nestled in a mountain pass in California, was situated on land leased from a Native American tribe. Over the years, it had been the site of battles, a stagecoach route, and sadly, even a dumping ground for bodies. Urban legends circulated about buses filled with homeless individuals being dropped off about a mile from the mall, where they wandered aimlessly with their meager belongings. This place was known for its harsh weather, especially during storms. While it had a casino and some hidden beauty in its desert surroundings, it also had a dark side, run-down areas, and financial difficulties. Despite the town's struggles, the spirit of its residents kept it alive. In this peculiar setting, I had my encounter with the paranormal. As I pushed open the restroom door, I immediately noticed two women and a child in the first row of stalls. The child was full of energy, bouncing around, while the women seemed agitated and loud. Their presence irritated me, so I decided to opt for the row of stalls on the far side of the restroom. These stalls were used less frequently and were generally cleaner. I entered the fourth or fifth stall, but something peculiar happened as soon as I stepped in. The back of my head began to tingle, a sensation I had learned to associate with impending paranormal experiences. However, I was in a hurry to use the restroom, so I tried to ignore it. But the tingling intensified, and I knew that something unusual was about to happen. Ignoring my instincts, I opened the door to the fourth stall, and there she was, an apparition of a young woman sitting on the toilet. What struck me as bizarre was that she appeared two-dimensional, like a paper doll that had been folded at the hips. She lay face down over her thighs, her legs flat and paper-thin, extending all the way down to the floor. She was transparent, allowing me to see both her front and back simultaneously. It was as if she projected herself as a two-dimensional figure. In an instant, I sensed her distress. She communicated that she felt sick, nauseous, and had a pounding headache. She had been high on drugs, had vomited on herself, and I could actually smell it. I could feel her nausea and the terrible hangover drowsiness that came with it. I felt as if I were going to vomit myself. She wore ripped blue jeans and a white or cream-colored halter topped with tiny blue designs. Her blonde hair was long, dirty, and stringy, and her arms appeared dusty. She was incredibly thin, with her hip bones and shoulder blades protruding. Her arms dangled at her sides like twisted paper streamers, and she wore a faded leather belt. She was covered in bruises and had dark circles under her eyes, which suggested a history of substance abuse. Despite her disheveled appearance, I could tell that she must have been quite pretty in life. In those 15 or 30 seconds that I stood there holding the stall door open, a wave of anger surged through me. I understood, in that brief moment, that she had been with two men who had driven her high on drugs, possibly heroin, until she had overdosed. In their panic, they had driven out to a desolate road in the dark desert and discarded her body there. She had trusted these men, thinking they were her friends, but they had sinister intentions. I could see a random section of the desert in her mind, one that closely resembled the area around the mall. I was stunned, and my initial reaction was anger. I asked her why she had done this, why she had shown me all of this so quickly. I felt overwhelmed, but I also felt her desperation. I knew I had taken in too much information too fast. Still, I couldn't help but ask, "What do you want?" She whispered, "I don't want anyone to know." Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished. I moved down 3 stalls to pee and told her not to follow me, but she did. She stood outside my stall, becoming more three-dimensional by then. Her hair hung down in front of her soiled clothes, and I could see her dirty feet with chipped toenail polish peeking out of her sandals. Annoyed and slightly frightened, I asked her what she wanted. She whispered back, "I don't want anyone to know." I replied firmly, "Okay, I see you. What can I do for you?" But she didn't answer, and she gradually faded from view, leaving me perplexed and slightly disturbed. Over the course of several months, I had 2 more encounters with her. Each time, I returned to the restroom, hoping to help her cross over to the other side. She had communicated that she wasn't sure if she was dead or merely experiencing a bad trip. She needed more time before she was ready to move on. I reached out to her telepathically, attempting to guide her towards the light. But on both occasions, she conveyed that it wasn't her time yet. Despite my efforts, I hadn't seen her since, and I couldn't find any record of her existence. I knew it was too late to find her physical body, and I planned to explore old missing person cases to see if her story could be corroborated. My journey to help her find peace continued, and while I couldn't prove her existence to others, I knew what I had experienced was real. The desert restroom had become an unexpected meeting point between the living and the dead, a place where a tormented soul sought solace in the midst of bustling shoppers and the running water. My quest to provide her closure was far from over, and I remained committed to helping her find the peace she so desperately needed.